I can't stand being alone. I just been living life, feed a bankroll. How the saying go, got it flooded to my ankles. Need a raincoat.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Get Cracking podcast. We are on a mission to healthy accelerate each one of us to happiness. And today we got another amazing guest, Aurelia. Hello.
Hi.
Super happy to have you here, and today there are big things on agenda. But before we dive in, the tradition is that everybody who comes in, they introduce themselves in 60 seconds. So it is a personal pitch presentation. You ready?
Sure.
So then the floor is yours, 60 seconds.
Okay, so my name is Aurelia and I currently work at Google as an account executive. I also have another hat, which is that I'm the neurodiversity advocacy lead for Google Ireland. So that's a job that's dear to my heart. About me, I'm originally from France, but I've lived in the Netherlands, the UK, Finland, and now I live in Dublin in Ireland. I'm very passionate about working for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's why I'm on this podcast today to talk mostly about how to accelerate your career. And thank you for having me.
Great. I think this was less than 60 seconds and super clear, super to the point, super good. And then you are right. You are here to speak about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then a bit about the Google, because Google is a big clickbait, so we cannot just skip it. So
I get it.
Let's get Google out of the plate before we speak about other matters. But can you tell us, so how did you get your place in Google? Everybody wants to work for Google or Microsoft or Apple, whatever it is, but how did you get your place?
So before we start, I have to, say a disclaimer that all views expressed here are my own and not that of Google, of course.
Yeah.
So I actually got headhunted. So I was very lucky that I was one of the few people who got into Google by being headhunted by a recruiter. Google gets more than 1 million applications every year, so you understand that it's actually harder to get into Google than to get into Harvard, statistically. So it's pretty hard. But I had actually applied to Google in, I think, 2016 and 2018 and got rejected. So, it's also a message that if you continue to sharpen your skill set, look at the jobs you're interested in and sort of reverse engineer them. Yeah. Like, look at the skills they want and work on those skills specifically, you have a much better chance, obviously. You also need, and I've learned from, working in different industry, that you need to have a very diverse skill set. So you need to become a generalist unless you work in engineering, which is a little bit different. But if you work in business side of things or sales, it's much better to be a generalist and a well-rounded person. And that's the reason why I did an executive MBA, for example. I became, much more sort of attractive to these companies once I had a more holistic knowledge of the business.
And then, so it actually sounded so easy from you that it's easier to get headhunted to Google than to get hired. But how do you get headhunted? For me, it sounds me like, I don't know, if I think about headhunting, rarely people would approach me to join something. But then let's say Google, but then I get the approaches. But then, so how do you get approached? How do you get headhunted?
I don't really know because I'm not a headhunter, but if you, it's a little bit of working on your skill sets and it's a little bit of circumstances and luck, right? You have to be in the right place at the right time, obviously, and that you can't really manufacture it, but you can manufacture your own luck, but like I said, by working on your skill set, but you have to be very intentional about what you're doing, right? If you're looking for a job as a marketing strategist at Google, you need to take that job description and work on each of the skill sets specifically, and also get certified, in anything that's important to that job. And that is the same for Microsoft, or if you want to work at TikTok or whatever, right? You need to be very intentional about the skill set you're trying to develop. And also, I would say what's important is to have a network, right? Yeah. So try to attend industry events and talk to people who've done this before. Try to get a coach on top of a mentor, because that's not really the same thing as well, the same role in your life and your professional career. Try to get advice from people who've been there. Right, I'm not talking about having a network so you can leverage it, because that's, you can do that. But you have to, when you network, you have to be able to bring something to the table and not consider your relationships to be transactional, right? So, get as much help as you can. But like I said, try to be intentional in whatever you're trying to do.
So what I've heard that you've mentioned, speak with people who are already there or who've done it, or let's say who have done it in the past, and then, understand them, ask them an advice and get the necessary mentorship. So I think this is also quite interestingly, one of the reasons I've started the podcast, to share the knowledge from people already who done it to me and then to the audience, hopefully. And then also another point that I wanted to highlight, you mentioned reverse engineering. Can we stop on this thing? So do you have the idea of how do you reverse engineer things?
Yeah, so that's actually my strategy in life, I suppose.
Yeah.
You take the end goal, right, and you try to work out the steps to achieve it. So let's say my goal was to live abroad, right? So I reverse engineered it by thinking, oh, what language do I need, for example? Okay, so I have to learn English because I didn't speak English at the time. And now if I wanted to work at a very large tech company, there's a little bit more steps, obviously, right? But it would be, for example, look at the job description. If it says you need project management skills, get a certification in project management, get actual projects under your belt that you can showcase and display, get people to vouch for you on that skill. That's a lot of different steps that you can accomplish, right? But you need to be able to demonstrate your achievements in whatever you're doing, okay? Everything relies on KPIs and not just saying it, okay? So if you can demonstrate in some ways your ability, that's what's going to help you. But reverse engineering, try to be very clear about all the steps, but they shouldn't be generic. They shouldn't be learn this skill, right? They should be how do we learn it and which way?
Yeah, and something to maybe build on top of what you just shared is that being really specific and concrete helps. We had a discussion with Yopo on other podcast, and it's all comes up on the same topic. Be specific, be clear of what you want, how you want. And then you mentioned, let's say, if it's a certificate, which certificate? When did you get it? What is the organization? And if this is the certificate that will get you, let's say, the door open, then you need to get it. In terms of skills, you already mentioned that in Google, they look for, let's say, a lot of general knowledge. Is this also true that they look for some creativity within the applications or like non-linear thinking? So do they ask certain questions and then they expect you to behave differently than, let's say, than the crowd?
So I think what you're referring to probably is what they call general cognitive ability, where you have to display a lot of transversal thinking, right? Or lateral thinking. So what they're interested in, a part of the applications at Google, and that's general knowledge. You can find this information on the internet. There's a step in the interview process called general cognitive ability, where they're going to ask you a question, an open question, and the answer doesn't matter. It's how you get to the end. A question could be, you want to open a food truck. How do you go about it? And that's the question.
Yeah.
So, and you can answer anything you want. Your answer can be 3 words. It can be 1,500 words. You can ask questions about it. So that's the point, right? You need to be able to formulate an hypothesis, also say how you're going to prove it, right? So you have to use the very scientific method when you go about this, even if it's business related, doesn't matter. So I think that's what you're referring to, but everything is based on the path you're taking to arrive to a conclusion. And for example, for a company like Google, and it's the same for any large tech company, you have to use a lot of data points to make your decision, right? So a data point in the question I just given you, for example, it's where am I going to put this food truck? How much is it going to cost to buy it? How much is it going to cost to operate? A lot of those data points. So that's what they're looking for usually. But that's also what I meant earlier when I talked about holistic thinking of the business aspect of things.
Yeah. And again, so what I see, it is also a lot about the approach. So you mentioned, let's say, hypothesis. Hypothesis is really important in this approach. So if you're opening the food truck, you have a first hypothesis that will be on a street A or a street B, and then which one is better, what's the timing is better, and then you drill into specific questions that you would ask them, or specific things that you need to set in order to get the food truck running. And I think, were there any like a bigger question? Have they asked you, if you want to launch the rocket to space or something?
So I don't know all the interview questions, and of course it's also confidential.
Yeah, true.
There are different types of questions depending on the job you will be applying for. For engineering question, you get a lot more technical questions, of course. But again, the answer doesn't matter. You can be way off in the answer because there's not one answer. They're really more interested in your thinking process.
But this again, I think thinking process is important. So once you speak about the food truck, this is something all of us know, and then we can imagine that. And then we can break it down and then go for plan and execution and asking questions. But then if we speak about the space and then we speak about the rockets, then at least me, I don't know anything. So then if I will be asked the question of hey, how would you build the rocket and launch it to space? I might get a bit puzzled.
Yeah. And that's interesting because that's where I think people trip actually, because it doesn't matter if you know anything about it. Your thinking process should be the same. Of course, they're not going to ask you to detail the calculation to launch a rocket. If you're not applying for a job as an astrophysicist, your thinking process should be the same. And this is actually, again, reverse engineering. So what are you trying to achieve, right? Launch a rocket, launch a food truck. What are you trying to do with it? I don't know, reach the moon or sell hot dogs. It's exactly the same thing. You have to go from the end goal and then at least articulate in an organized manner, right, how you would go about it.
Yeah.
The details don't matter.
It doesn't matter, yeah. So you just break it down and then you understand it, hopefully, to some extent, and then you go about that. Cool. And then also something else I was interested. So I know that you switched quite a bit between careers, and would you kind of share to us what kind of positions you had through your career? And so we worked at some point in Swap It together, and then now you're in Google, but then through your life, what are the, let's say, key points?
Yeah, so the sort of continuing thread always on in my life has been sales, right? So I started as a sort of customer service person, and then I quickly moved into sales, and this was, 15 years ago. Because sales is a position that exists in every organization, and it means that you're able to see a lot of different stuff when you work in sales. I sold technical equipment, but I also sold travel, and now I'm working on ad space basically with Google. So sales is really a position where you can extend your career a lot. But
then also sales, it's about selling yourself. So you always need to sell something. Like even today you came in and asked you to kind of present yourself. So your self presentation is the sales process. Let's say, how
Sure.
you're just explaining how cool are you, and then why listeners need to listen for that. When you meet someone on the street, it's kind of sales process.
Yeah, I mean, sales is everywhere, right? And sales is a lot of stuff. It's not just I want you to accomplish this commercial transaction, right? Sales is about convincing people, that you're valuable as well, or anything is worthy of their time or their money, right? But it's about value and exchange of value.
Yeah, and then so through the sales, so this was like your career, like the same around your career.
Yeah.
So you always been kind of somewhere nearby sales.
Yeah, I was always near sales, I guess.
Yeah.
And this is also, sales is a bit like poker, right? So it's easy to learn it, but it's hard to master, right? So it's a continuous learning process to go about sales. And you can sell so many different things.
Yeah.
So that's the interesting part as well.
But now, so it also seems that now it is maybe a turning point of your career, since I heard that you're also doing something different now, in addition to sales. So would you open up a bit more? So what exactly you're doing?
Yeah, what is it I'm doing? Yes, that's a question I get a lot. What exactly are you doing?
Yeah. Me too, you cannot believe, yeah.
Yes. I will finally explain, I know people want to know. So yes, I work as an account executive. That's my day job. But I also do community contributions. So I've been recently named Neurodiversity Advocacy Lead for Google Ireland. So this is a newly open position in EMEA, so Europe, Middle East and Africa, where we have an employee group inside Google called the Disability Alliance.
Right.
So we have other groups like Black Googlers, the Hindus Network. We have a lot of these groups that represent communities, right? But because I am neurodivergent myself, I work with the Disability Alliance, and I have been named, the Neurodiversity Advocacy Lead, so I can sort of advocate for the need of the neurodivergent community inside of Google Ireland. So it's a position that's more focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is something that I'm very passionate about.
How does it, so like the way I see it, the Google probably is the huge organization, and then EMEA region also surely have lots of employees within this kind of geography. How can you keep up with everything? And I'm just kind of curious of like the size of work and the commitment and how many, I don't know, meetings you would have on this kind of subject. Because what I would imagine, there's lots of education needed, and there's lots of onboardings needed, and then there's just lots of people. So how big is the workload?
So it's enormous.
Yeah.
But obviously, you can only work so many hours a day. What's important, first of all, is that people have to understand what neurodiversity is. So the Disability Alliance represents all of disabled employees. So that's already a lot of people with a lot of different needs, okay? So I'm only now in charge of representing the neurodiversity part of that, which is already a lot of different folks, right? So we have the autism group, ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette's, OCD. That's a lot of different people that don't want the same thing necessarily, right?
And then maybe just to clarify, so you have, let's say, Googlers with those disabilities.
Sure.
So, and then maybe how is Google going on in terms of like hiring more, or is it like accidental that this happened there?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because a lot of organizations, like for example, Microsoft has an autism hiring program.
Okay.
Google tried something. They're trying to continue doing that, but there's also, first of all, there's a legal aspect to this. That's you can't positively discriminate someone to hire them. So that's a legal and fairness issue. Also, the accommodations process is usually maybe not great for neurodivergent people applying for jobs, so they tend not to ask for accommodations. So they end up like me, sort of accidentally there. But we're working now to make it better. And so, like you said, there's a hiring aspect to this. There's a retention aspect, so people who are already inside the company. And there's, the building community aspect of it. So that's just a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Including the accommodations aspect at work. So people who need workplace accommodation, which is very important as well.
How does it, so I'm kind of trying to get some, practical tips and advices always through the podcast, is that, so would you be able to, I don't know, let's say if I would be in Google, so can you give me some tips, how should I be about everything and what should I do to, let's say, support neurodiversity program, or just include, let's say, people from who are part of this?
Yeah, that's a big question, right? So at Google, we always say you have to be googly, right? So
Googly.
It means that you have to be quite nice. That's, a sort of an adjective that they invented, but it means just be a nice person, right, in general. This advice is valid for if you work with disabled people, neurodivergent people, or people from underrepresented communities as well, right? Just give people space to express what they need, okay? So I have a great example of when I came into the studio, right? And the lights were too bright for me because I have sensory issues, right? And it was very difficult to deal with. And so I told you, can we turn off some lights? And straight away, you went and tried and find a solution that worked for me. I felt safe, expressing that need, and that's what everyone can do.
Yeah.
It should be normal to say, I need a different chair, or I would prefer to do this, or I feel more comfortable if we went about like this.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be a big deal. You should say, okay, thanks for letting me know. Let's try to accommodate you. And the world will be a better place if we all did that.
And also, like from what I would imagine from, the similar type of request, they're like nothing special. They're just like today we did light, you're right. So can we change the light a bit? We change the light and kind of that's it. So, but then what I maybe have a conflict in my mind is that, so I've heard, let's say, people with let's say disability, people with disabilities, they would prefer to be treated as kind of same as everybody else. And then I'm happy about that, but then also maybe we need to accommodate and need to be aware. So then every time I have this kind of conflict of, let's say, or I don't have this conflict, but I don't maybe completely understand how it should be.
Yeah.
So should it be like normal for everybody else, but kind of special in some sense, or not special, or Just help me out.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I was actually going to talk about this, and it's a very big misconception, right? So that's the difference between egalitarian and equitable, and that's a big deal. So egalitarian means everyone should be treated the same, and this is how we were raised, most of us, right? You know, treat people the way you want to be treated, etc. No, stop doing that. This is not good, you know. Yes. You should not treat everyone the same, okay? That's it. That is not correct. Yeah. Because imagine I'm half your size in height, and we are looking at, you know, a football match across the fence. If we are treated the same, I'm not seeing anything of the football match. You know what I mean? So
this is excellent example, yeah.
This is the same thing for the light. Maybe you enjoy them, I don't. So, you know, I need some accommodation, and then I can function the same way. But people have to understand that accommodations, like a wheelchair, for example, or a crutch, or turning off the light, or using a different vocabulary, that's a lot of different things, is just leveling off the playing field. Imagine I come, you know, to play football and I don't have a ball and you have 6 balls. That's exactly the same thing, you know. You just need to give me some balls so I can play, you know. And there's a famous quote by Werner Myers, you know, who's a leading inclusion specialist, who said, you know, diversity is being asked to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. Right? I think it's a very illustrative quote. But yeah, again, don't treat everyone the same. Treat people the way they require to be treated, to be at the same level as you if you don't have a disability.
True, and then maybe just to make it towards the outcome of this piece of a discussion. So what I feel the world would be better if we need certain accommodation or requirement, we would need to raise it up. So we need to share, we need to be brave enough to share, hey, say I need this and this, you know, in order to me to, you know, function well in a certain particular setup from one hand side. And from another hand side, like, you know, we would need to ask. So is there anything that needs to be changed? And then we need to act on it. So the actual action and then change of setups or behavior or language, like you said. Yeah.
And one thing that everyone can do today, basically, is ask, again, give that space, because it feels often like a burden that you constantly have to ask for your needs to be met. So a lot of people get tired because they don't get what they need and they don't ask, and they end up being isolated, being maybe even injured or socially left alone, for example. One thing you can do is, you know, when you meet someone or you're in a professional context, you can always ask, do you require any accommodations? You know, I'm very happy to accommodate you. Give that chance for people to say that.
Is there a way to maybe notice this moment, or like, you know, notice somehow like in which situation I need to ask that? Because let's say, especially in Google, then there's like plenty of people, plenty of meetings happening, and you have plenty of colleagues, and you don't know if you need to ask or you don't need to ask, and who would be the one. And then it's also super wrong to do some, you know, random assumptions and then you ask. But is there some indicators like that I should follow?
I think you should ask always, because again, you don't know who needs what, and you should never assume, of course. Nor should you ask an invasive question like, I see you're limping, do you want a different chair? No, you should not do that. You know, never assume anything, right? But by asking everyone, then you leave the door open for everyone to be welcome, because a lot of people who have invisible disability feel bad asking, or feel, you know, like they don't really want to do that. So we should make it normal to ask, actually. So the more space we create, the more we can have people expanding in it and thriving.
And then, I mean, it's also, the way I see it, it's super connected with our emotional intelligence as the human beings. So frequently we just cannot notice, or we cannot ask nicely or politely. Then this may lead to some wrong situation. Because also what I frequently see, people just don't accommodate for each other, like, at all. So because everybody minding their own business, and then, you know, maybe they don't have enough emotional intelligence to, you know, figure this thing out.
Sure. I mean, a lot of people are trying, you know, but we should always try and lead with empathy, right, in general. So just assume good intent from people. A lot of the time, for example, because of my neurodiversity, I don't look at people in the eye very often, and people can get, you know, offended or something, but that's just something that I do that's quite normal for me. So just, you know, give space to people, but I also want to point out that diversity and inclusion conversation around race, around disability, you're going to offend some people when you ask questions, even if you're trying to be very empathetic. And that's okay, you know? You have to be also conscious that this is a sort of evolving thing, and that also a lot of different people have different opinion about how they want to be treated, okay? And that's fine. Some people, for example, think that neurodiversity is not a disability, so they don't want to be called disabled. Me, I call myself disabled, so that's a different thing. If someone says, I don't like what you said, or that's not my preference, you can say, okay, thanks for letting me know, and move on.
Yeah.
And that's fine, you know?
That is also fine, yeah. Yeah, this is super interesting. So we also had another conversation, and then I would be super interested to kind of hear your perspective. And actually, you already touched a bit on that, and it's about the, you know, the freedom of speech and a kind of open communication. So how can we just communicate freely about everything? So because what I'm, let's say, and also this is from my observations, I frequently see there is a lot of, let's say, anger in a certain kind of situations. And then the anger is usually connected with really sensitive topics. And then sensitive, I would mean, let's say, racism, equality, maybe disability as well, didn't see, but then with the racism. But then what I feel that we really need to speak and we need to discuss in order to kind of maybe understand and educate.
Yeah.
And then now when we speak about this and other matters, do you see the same? Do people prefer, let's say, not to speak because they meet certain aggression there and they don't want to go down this pit hole? Or...
Well, that's interesting because I would like to take the side of people who are angry for just a minute, right? And we talked about empathy before. I want to also give a little bit of context. I think that's my opinion. Of course, we always say, "Oh, we should try and be calm and discuss, etc." But you have to understand that we have to understand collectively that groups that are angry for a reason as well.
Exactly.
Okay. If we talk about race, of course, this is a very difficult, sensitive topic that carries a lot of emotional baggage.
Yeah.
People have a right to be angry, and they get angrier when their emotional needs are not being recognized. You know, if I tell you, look, I'm very angry because everyone treats me weird or something, and you say, that's not true, we need to talk about this in a calm way, I'm going to be very more angry.
True.
So first you need to acknowledge the other person's feelings. And that's not even related to, I think, those topics. It's just good communication, right? So say, look, I understand how you feel, and I only seek to understand how you feel better.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these discussions sort of just escalate because everyone is trying to also talk on top of one another, but there's a group that is not being given the space to express their anger. And that's very important that we give them that space.
Yeah.
I also need it sometimes to vent about how I feel because it's hard to be disabled. It's hard to be a person of color. It's hard, okay? And your life is not the same if you're from a majority group. So I think to untrigger those situations is just to learn for us to be better communicators, right? So give emotional space to people.
I like your approach. And also, so what I see that, you know, let's say some groups would never be able to understand other groups because they don't experience the same. But then in the same time, they can give this space you've mentioned for expressing this in other groups, like real feeling, real anger, and then, you know, be empathic towards those and then just let them vent out in certain case and then move to the discussion or don't move to the discussion. So it's already secondary. Yeah.
I'm going to give you a very practical example of my own life. I grew up in an all-white environment, right? I went to private Catholic school in the suburb of Paris. It's pretty white.
Okay.
So I didn't understand the lived experience of people of color, of immigrants.
Yeah.
Didn't understand any of it. I wasn't racist. I just didn't get it.
Yeah.
And then when I started having a more diverse group of friends, I couldn't understand their struggle and I was defensive. You know, that's what happens when you don't understand something. You become defensive. So I realized this. It took me a while. I was very young, obviously. But what did I do, to offset this is that I went out and seeked the lived experience of these people, most of these groups, I didn't even know I was disabled at the time. I wasn't diagnosed, but I seeked out the experience of these more diverse people. And then I understood after having spoken to them and, seeing their experience. So everyone can understand, but you need to actively get out of your comfort zone, create some cognitive dissonance for a little while. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you need to seek it out.
Yeah. Maybe if we shift the gears a bit towards more future. So now as a lead, you're like driving certain initiatives. You're trying to make it better. What is your vision, let's say? So where you want all of us to be, and then even bigger than Google thing. So imagine that you succeed with everything.
Yeah. So my goal obviously is world domination. So to do that, what I would love to achieve with at least my job and my community sort of contribution is what I'm doing right now, to talk to more people, get more awareness, and for the fact that we are all a little bit different, sometimes a lot. It's okay, there's variation in the human genome, okay, it's okay. We are not all the same, we don't have to be the same. And it's assume good intent and just, go along. We can, still function all together. Yeah. My goal is more acceptance in general, right?
So then if you really extrapolate to the whole world, so then like we see people accepting each other, we see people understanding each other like way more, and then we see people creating the correct environments and then asking for advice and being more empathetic. What is this kind of so?
Yeah, exactly. I wish for a world that would be more empathetic, basically, we are very, as humans, we're very self-centered. That's normal, that's our nature, right? But we have become a lot more individualist, in Western culture. And it's something that I think bears reflection why, this has happened as well, which has created quite a lot of loneliness, right? So if we try to have more empathy, we can also, I find it a great way to reconnect with people in general. And, there's this concept in mindfulness and meditation that we are all living this shared life, okay? If you think you're alone in your struggle, that's probably 99% not correct. Someone has gone through the same thing at some point in their life, or there's at least like 1 other million people going through the same thing. If you
think of this scale, the world is just huge, massive. Yeah. There's so many people, and then we have a time equation. So then there's these different people who actually lived years. So then at some point they've surely been kind of feeling completely the same.
I mean, one practical advice is, if you don't do something that's kind, don't do it. Try to have good intentions in general and consider how you can accommodate other people in general, and just try to be kind,
Yeah, I think this is a great advice. And I hope we reach, the world who is like better in those. I mean, almost impossible, like to reach the ultimate world with everybody is happy, everybody feels great.
Hippie dream.
Hippie dream, yeah. Don't think it's happening. And also maybe the one thing I wanted to touch upon, and then you've mentioned already that you lived in several different countries and then originally actually grown up in Paris. But what are the main challenges that you faced while, let's say, moving around, and then how you dealt with those?
Well, I mean, there's a lot, but to be fair, I choose to move every time, so I was intentional about it. I wasn't displaced, right? Which is not the same thing, obviously. Some of these challenges are just operational, but I was also very lucky that I moved in Europe every time, so I don't have any visa issue because of the Schengen space, okay? So I can just move anywhere and start working. So some of the challenges were just more operational in nature, and I used, my planning skills and the reverse engineering to just be intentional about what I was trying to accomplish.
And was it so, for example, in Google, they even help you out?
They relocated me, so that was not a struggle.
That's the advice for everybody. If you want to be relocated, get to Google, and they will relocate you, no struggle.
Work for a big tech company, then no more struggle.
Yeah, and also I heard like nowadays it is pretty normal because there is a lack of talent everywhere. So then once the headhunting happens and then they have a decent budgets, then they help out everybody. Cool. We will be walking towards wrapping up. Any final tips or suggestions to anyone who is listening?
I think I dropped a lot already. So. No, like I said, try to reflect on what you put in this world, basically. I know it's easy to say, but I also want to say that at some point in my life, I was depressed. I was in a really bad place in my life, and I came out of it with the support of my family. And now I'm in a good place where I can say, look, I'm reflecting on what I'm putting in this world, and what I want to put is empathy and kindness. So be more intentional if you can about how you expressing yourself in this world and how you relate to other people would be my advice.
And look at you now. I mean, you're kicking ass. You're inspiring at least me, and I hope hopefully people listening get also inspired by all of this. Super good. How do people find about you, and then also where people maybe educate themselves? What are the best places to be educated on these matters?
I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, right? If you want. In terms of neurodiversity, I would advise just going on Google and having a look at what neurodiversity is. There's actually a lot of good content. There's a lot of great creators in the autism, ADHD space as well. And just, educate yourself in general on what it is and what the movement is, because it's really coming to fruition now as well. Also, maybe something to keep in mind is that it's a movement that has a lot of intersectionality, right? Which means you're not just autistic or just have ADHD. You're also autistic, a woman and a white woman and a heterosexual woman, so you have to consider that someone is not just one thing, right? So yeah, that's where I would start,
Cool. So then we will leave the LinkedIn link for Aurelia in the show notes, and then maybe also couple sources where people can go and read about these matters. And yeah, we will wrap up here. That's the pod. Aurelia, thank you so much for being here. This was great discussion, and it was quite quick. I didn't really notice that this time has passed. And I wish you all the best on your journey. And if there's anything, me or listeners can help you out, we will be happy to help you out. And everybody else, press the subscribe button.
Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
How the saying go, got it flooded to my ankles, need a raincoat.
Pair of boots and a dang bow, gotta stay flow. I might pull up in a stagecoach playing Beethoven.
Whoa.